Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. My day job is running Did It, a digital first marketing agency. I also run a nonprofit called Giving Forward that generates revenue for other nonprofits using cause marketing. Today, I'm wearing my eMarketing Association hat, and I'm pleased to be here with Steve Spiro, who also wears multiple hats, one of which is his being a master connector. And he's not only a master connector and connecting people to each other, but he's actually also got a podcast that talks about it. So I'd love to hear the origin story of sort of how you went from just being, a person who does biz dev for a living to deciding that you should be able to teach other people to be master connectors and mentor them on score and the other things that you do.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you for having me on the podcast, on the show, and I appreciate it, Kevin. It's an honor to be on with you. You are legendary for sure. So, but yeah. So my background, real briefly, born and raised in the Bronx. My dad was an entrepreneur, owned a liquor store. But swayed me going into that. So I wound up going into advertising marketing. Went to high school and college for that. Got out, couldn't get a job, so started a company, opened an advertising company. Did that for a lot of years until the economy shifted, and then I basically had to figure out how to reinvent myself and got into sales, technology sales, and not sure why a shy introverted kid from the Bronx would do that, but I did, and so it was a blast, and I did very well in that. Today I do communication consulting, where I help companies streamline and automate how they communicate and connect with their clients, utilizing artificial intelligence. That's sort of what I do, kind of my day job, if you will, and it's been a lot of fun and a ton of fun. But the truth is that how all that kind of came about is, I was shy introverted, picked on, bullied, learning disabled, dyslexic, not knowing, that I was, if you will, pretty broken, if you will. And then finally, as later on in life, through a good friend, I was introduced to a very successful entrepreneur who really took me under his wing, took on a mentoring role with me and got me on a path of self-development, books and audios and networking. And so helped that with that transition. And it's been an incredible journey, and I've been blessed to be able to, be mentored, but also be able to mentor others in different ways, not just only through SCORE, but just through helping other people. I love working with millennials and young folks, and I love to see the light go on in their eye, open up in their eyes, if you will, and as they really grow and change. And I think there's a big niche or need, if you will, in terms of the younger generation and how to really communicate and connect. And they're so device oriented to be able to actually communicate and connect. It's tough. So I love doing that. And so, building and growing a network, I started to grow, obviously in biz dev, you do a lot of networking, and I started to really get good at it, and amassed today 17,000 contacts on my phone and 13,000 LinkedIn connections, which to some people, maybe you, Kevin, that's probably amateur. But it's decent. And I've been asked to speak in different, live events, lunch and learns at companies and different kinds of colleges, and enjoy that tremendously. And so at some point I started doing a video. I do I call it Fired Up Friday Master Connector Tips. I think it's 90 weeks in a row now. It's crazy, where I'm able to, it's like a 3-minute video. If I stutter, 3 to 5 minutes. If I stutter, I don't care. It still gets out. It's like a one-take thing. And it's been a lot of fun. But when the pandemic hit, I started to see a lot of live streaming, and LinkedIn, of course, had that, the live streaming as well. And I found out you had to apply. And for kicks and giggles, I put my application, and to my shock and dismay, I got approved. And so I went to my network because I felt completely over my head. And a good friend of mine, Cameron, who does a live show 5 days a week called Biz Dev Live, I told him my dilemma. He's like, dude, I've been trying to get on LinkedIn Live for 2 years. We should collaborate. And so the Master Connection series was born, and it's been a ton of fun, and put out great content this coming week, which I'm not sure when this is airing, but will probably be over by then. But you can watch the replay. We're doing more productivity in half the time, and it's been always something really interesting. We got great panelists coming on, and I think, Kevin, you're scheduled to come on our show at some point soon. We're excited about that as well. So it's been a ton of fun, and it's really stretched me big time, because live broadcasts is definitely different. And, you get it kind of, especially with us having like 3 or 4 panelists every week, it's almost like herding cats. It's like, but it's been a lot of fun and very rewarding. So it's fun reaching people and And, I say it all the time on the show. My purpose on this planet is to be the light and to really inspire people and help them, just like me, get out of that comfort zone. And eventually want to be on a TED Talk stage, and eventually want to travel the world and be paid to inspire people and tell my story and really share hope. So that's it.
Great, great. Well, obviously, as a result of your Master Connector series, probably even more so your personal sales journeys as a biz dev person and salesperson, I'd love to hear your sort of tips on prioritization of time. Right, it's the one asset we don't have a lot of time on, and I've seen you've covered it with guests before, but you've probably gotten pearls of wisdom from your guests, but you've also had your own personal sort of way of doing things to make sure that whatever productivity time you have every day is absolutely the best use of your time. And so a lot of times with salespeople, depending on the business that they're in, right, there's a combination of whales, tuna, and bluefish that they can, they're all different sizes, right? And so the whale hunting is tough, but you sort of want to at least spend a little bit of time whale hunting just in case you catch a whale. And you probably can't feed your family on minnows or your company on minnows, so you don't want to be going after those either. So that, that's part of the whole time management conundrum that I think that salespeople have, right? Is sort of, how do I break up my day? Which leads do I go after? Any words of wisdom in that area?
Well, I'm going to cover the time management in general, because I think what happened now that we've gone, from COVID, we've gone, remote in a lot of cases. And, now a lot of us are working from our home, and, there could be the tendency to be distracted. There's a project at the house, work or whatever. And and it also applies to, do you go after the big fish or the little fish and all that kind of stuff? It's all related. And so the best lesson was a visual lesson that I was taught quite a few years back, and it made a lot of sense. And that is, it was a college professor. He had a shop class, and I guess the students were belly aching about the the homework and all the work they had, and they had no time and this and that. And so the following class, he came in, and when they walked in, he had the shop desk, if you will, shop table, whatever. And on the table was this huge glass beaker, same cylindrical glass beaker. And on the side of it were these, decent sized rocks. And he proceeded to, as class settled, he proceeded to put the rocks in the beaker. And he asked, as he filled it up to the top, he asked the class, is the beaker full? And of course, everyone said yes. And then he, underneath the table, grabbed a whole bunch of pebbles, and he poured it in and settled in, and obviously in the rocks. And then, he asked the question, and most people said yes again, is it full? And then he proceeded to get gravel and pour that in. And then he did the sand. And at the end of that, everyone said, yeah, it's full. And then he went and grabbed water and poured it in. And he said, now it's full. And he said, the point of the story is, if I put the large rocks in first, if I put the pebbles in or the sand in, I would have never been able to fit those large rocks in. And the lesson that I learned from that is, I'm a big believer in not time management, right? Because, you can't manage time. It's 24 hours. We don't manage it, right? But we can manage events. We can manage our calendar. And what I've learned is, you put the large rocks in your calendar first, and then the little pebbles, and so forth. And a lot of times, and the younger people are probably the biggest, they have this biggest challenge is they're very much emergency or urgency focused, right? Versus priority focused, right? What's the most important thing to do? So once you figure out what your priorities are, then you put them in your calendar. And I'm huge on the calendar. I say this all the time. I live and die by my calendar. And that's probably should be I live and live by the calendar, because it's kind of morbid, right? But I live and die by the calendar. In other words, if it's not on the calendar, I'm not doing it. And that's been very, very, very effective for me in especially when you have, like you and I, Kevin, we have a lot of components in our life to be productive. If you just let things just happen the way they're going to happen, it's crazy. So hopefully that helps.
Great. Yeah. So do you leave a certain amount of blocked off time in your calendar to just sort of catch up on the more the less exciting stuff, let's say, that sort of, it's still important. It may not be urgent, right? But eventually you need to get it done. Do you block off sort of free time?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, for me, like there's in the biz dev world, obviously the most productive is when you're talking to people, you're out talking to people, right? And so, and then there's a lot of paperwork, although it's electronic these days, right? There's that stuff, right? The administrative stuff. I try my best to do that in off hours, right? So like in from the 8 to 9 hour, right, or time that is less productive, do it then, right? Or if I get a cancellation, I have a gap in my time. But yeah, it's always trying to keep it, to a time definitely allocated for sure, but allocated at a time that's not going to really interfere with, the lifeblood of which is, obviously in the biz dev world is gaining new business.
Great. So, putting the sort of master connector hat on, obviously, if you spend too much time, helping other people, then even from a personal balance perspective, maybe it doesn't work out. I'm a big fan of paying things forward. That's why I called my nonprofit Giving Forward. But do you on your calendar also sort of block off specific periods of time where you're essentially focused on helping other people, but not being in sales mode?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, that's the way I live my life. Is I'm trying to live my life as a way to just give somehow, some way. It's a giving spirit. And so, I'll use, you mentioned Master Networks, Master Connector, right? So there's networking time, right? So that, and when I do networking, my heart is how can I add value? How can I help? So I do block off some time, and I love the Calendly. I'm not, I know there's other ones, but I love Calendly because it gives me the ability to block off. I try to do them early morning or after hours or a little during lunch, and I kind of block off time to do those things. And it's linked up with obviously my regular calendars, so that if there's something I have to do during that time, it's not available anymore. So it's great. It's a great way to do it. But yeah, I mean that's it. And then of course after hours, if I'm going to have, a time where I can maybe, pay it forward and mentor somebody if need be, it's going to be after working hours, obviously. And, back in the day, before COVID, maybe grabbing coffee with somebody or, maybe a dinner or whatever. But yeah, typically after hours or in the morning before the day starts.
Right, right. Well, you probably end up talking to a lot of folks who are in a biz dev role or a sales role in your networking. Is there a consensus yet as to whether or not people who used to sell in person should be moving back to selling in person, or do you feel like the consensus is still like, okay, we should keep doing these Zooms, keep doing these Google meetings, keep doing these Skypes? Are you getting any consensus yet, or is it really a personal decision that people are making?
I think it's personal. I think, for me, it's I'm enjoying and loving the fact that you could be a lot more productive. Like, if I've been to a client already, I'm not so sure how much more value I'm going to do by going to their office again to cover certain things. But then there's going to be times where it's going to be very, very necessary. And so I think it's a combination. I think you got to, a good friend of mine who's a mentor to me says, you don't check your brains at the door. You gotta kind of like think a little bit and say, okay, what's going to make the most sense here? But I think what's good about the virtual meetings is I find people are more open or willing to actually make a meeting virtual than not. If it's a face-to-face, they're a little more protective of their calendar. So you could get a lot more done, a lot more meetings accomplished virtually. But the crucial ones, if it's possible, many times it'd be great if you could do it in face-to-face.
Yeah, it's sort of funny because I've gone back to this idea I had several years ago about somebody being lunch worthy or dinner worthy, like, either because I could help them or they could help me, or it would be just an interesting person to talk to because,
Yeah.
You have a limited amount of time, but you have even less sort of business meal times, right? So you sort of really, if you're going to do a lunch, not only do you have the entire time of the lunch blocked off, but you got to get to the restaurant, right? So
Right.
you could end up destroying a big chunk of your day to do that. So have you heard any sort of words of wisdom, for those people who were heavy lunchers or after work drink people or dinners, right? Are they still using the same kind of lunch worthy, dinner worthy scale in setting up their calendars?
I haven't heard anything about that. But I for myself, I definitely have a tendency now. I got a message from somebody who said, I really want to, meet with you. He said, can we meet face to face? And I'm respectful, but I said, let's start with Zoom. And then if perhaps the next meeting we could look to go, do it something face to face in person. So I think that, to me, that makes sense, right? Because, I was spending a good amount of time, money, cheap coffee, or, hopefully nobody gets offended. I'm not a big Starbucks guy. To me, it tastes really burnt, but I like Dunkin' Donuts. But Starbucks is a great place to go. And of course, I'd support. If I'm going to sit in their chair, in their table, I'm going to support. I'm going to get a cup. But there was a lot of coffee and money on diners, spent on, things that were just, it was nice, but not really adding any value for either party. So I think, Zoom kind of gets a lot of that accomplished. And I don't like to categorize people. That's just, I guess, not the way I like to do it. I'm not saying there aren't people that do that, but I think, in terms of networking, it's a good first step, just to get a feel for each other. And then, okay, let's see where we should go. Maybe we should go take it to another step and go grab coffee. Or, I mean, think about it, right? I've been out of the dating world for years. But when you dated, right, you started out in a neutral place. Maybe it was coffee, right? And then if the date was worthy, right, then you went, the second date was maybe for dinner, right? So it's the same idea, right?
Yep, absolutely. It's been interesting to watch some of the startups that were in the networking business and adapt to the pandemic. I don't know if you've used Lunch Club or not, but Lunch Club is
One
one of
time.
them. And they used to be
Yeah,
in-person lunches, which of course
sure.
were a much higher hurdle, like for somebody to be lunch worthy. And they went virtual during the pandemic. And the theory is, of course, that their AI algorithm matches you up with people that you should be having conversations with. I'd say it's actually, in my experience of using it quite a few times, the conversations have all been useful and educational. I wouldn't say it's been a big driver of new business necessarily, but certainly it's resulted in some leads. Have there been other things that you've tested, during the pandemic, other than obviously using Zoom more and using virtual meetings, but just tech platforms like Lunch Club or others that you're using to bring in sort of fresh networking opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one that's been great for me is purely LinkedIn. And, I think a lot of times people use social media as just a way to amass a network, but often don't do much with it. And they put out posts, they get the endorphin hit with the likes and the comments, but not really doing much. And I've made a very conscious effort to a very large degree of taking every single I make an effort, everyone that connects with me, everyone, I look to have a conversation with them, either phone call or Zoom call, everyone. Now, not everyone agrees to it. And I follow throughout that relationship. So if there's a job change or work anniversary, I'll send a message, I hit the button, congrats on your job change. And if I get a response back, I'll send a message, hey, we should catch up over a phone call or whatever, Zoom call. And, again, so I'm always trying to take those relationships, which are just at a distance, and make them more personal, get them more to be, a relationship, a real connection, right? Not just somebody's in my network, but that's why master connector versus master networker, right? So that's been a big thing. I also belong to another networking group called Master Networks. I find that organization to be very good. I like it because it's relational based and it's not transactional, and it's also learning based as well. So I have a good feeling about that. And it's, there's chapters around the country, so you're able to go and visit others and make connections that way. And I'll visit other networking groups. I was on a group in Palm Beach, Florida today on Zoom. Group. It was a big group. It was like 60 people on this in this meeting. So there's other things that are out there that are great, and I'll bounce around and see who else what are other ones I could experience and so forth. So yeah, that's it. And then I think I may have shared this with you, Kevin. The world is my networking event. I had to go to Firestone Tire today and get some work done on my tires in my car, and I met a guy there. So I mean, the world is a networking event, right? And I know that's unusual in the New York area, the tri-state area, because people are like, if don't talk to strangers, but I do. And so kill me for it. I don't know. You don't like it? All right, sorry, but that's just me. And I love doing it. And believe it or not, I've made some really, really good connections and have developed some really amazing relationships through those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to some extent, the way New York is portrayed in the movies, right, as opposed to sort of a bunch of rude people who won't chat with you and have a conversation is not accurate. At least not in my case,
Yeah.
because I've if I'm online or waiting in the checkout or whatever, I'm going to have a conversation with somebody.
Sure.
You never know who they're going to be. Back in the days when we all used to fly a lot more, right? It was
Yeah.
almost like playing the lottery every time you got sat next to somebody,
Right.
right? You had the chances of that person
True.
actually being a really interesting connection, or just a complete dud, right? So
Yeah.
it was funny. A friend of mine, Peter Shankman, started a company around that called Air Traductions, where people who were on the
Wow.
same flight would actually try to match up with each other before they got on the flight.
That's
It
interesting.
required a certain critical mass, obviously, of users on
Yeah.
any particular flight. But I thought it was fascinating, the idea that, well, if you're going to be stuck next to somebody, it might as well be somebody you want to talk to.
Yeah. It's so funny, but you're right about the New Yorkers in general, though. I think because New Yorkers in general, we're really focused, we're driven. We're rushing around here, we're rushing around there. I think you're right. But I could tell you numerous stories, right? I haven't been to the gym. I work out almost every day, but I haven't been to the gym after COVID hit. I kind of stopped my membership. But it's funny because the gym was another place I would love to talk to people, and it's interesting, right? You'd have the guy with the hoodie, and he has a scowl on his face, the headset, and I would just, for the fun of it, I would be like, and he went from this, and you said something, he's like, yeah, like he lit up, like like you would expect he's gonna like bite your head off, right? But the minute you break space, the minute you make an interruption, it's amazing. Often now it's like a dog, right? Dog. If you go to pet a dog, you're gonna get one of three reactions, right? You either get they want to bark and bite your hand, and to back off. And there's people like that in all parts of the world, not just New York. There's people that the dog that wants to wag its tail and lick your hand, and it really wants the attention. And there's a lot of people like that, right? And then there's the one that just doesn't really care, walks away, right? Doesn't really want the attention. So people have that sort of reaction. I'm not kind of describing people that they're dogs or anything, but there's a similarity to that. So and that's the same reaction. It's crazy, but just talk to people. It's amazing how open they really are once you break space or create that interruption.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think one thing you and I probably have in common is that we would probably be classified in a psychology test as introverts, right? But yet we're
Yes.
both mainly in sales, or in a role that includes a lot of biz dev, right? And
Yeah.
so, for me, I had to make a concerted effort to like sort of break out of that. And I'm sure a lot of people who end up in sales roles are similar. Not everyone's the life of the party, and to some extent, actually, the life of the party guys or women aren't necessarily always good salespeople, right?
Sure.
And so for those people who everyone hates cold calling. I mean, in reality, I mean, yeah, it is sort of like playing the lottery too, because you could hit it big. But the reality is it's typically a pretty stressful part of a salesperson's environment. And part of what we do in networking is really trying to avoid the cold call, right? We're trying to figure out how to network to somebody so that it's a warm introduction instead of cold. But if you're stuck in a sales environment where you're going to end up cold, like what's worked well for you to sort of get you motivated in a cold call, cold meeting environment?
I'll let you know when it happens, right? I mean, well, so a couple things. One of the things that back in the old, so you're talking cold calls. You're not talking about networking environments. You're
Yeah,
talking
I'm talking
about
about cold calls.
cold
Yeah.
calls. I mean, it's just, I put it on my calendar, and I create, what I'll do is I'll create a calendar event for every single stop in that I need to do. I like to know where I'm going. I like to have the basic information. I don't just like random. I used to do that back in the day when I was selling copiers, but you just show up at the door, and it might have even been at your doorstep, Kevin, and when your company did it at one point. I'm sure I did, but that doesn't work, right? So what I figured is, having a little research, knowing who you're going to be asking for, having a little background on the company. I put a little calendar invite, and I kind of, set up the day, and then those are the places I actually go, and I actually would order them, made a little game out of it. I, geographically make sure, I wasn't like driving here, driving here, and driving here. Obviously, you're working in the city. That's not applicable for you, but that'll be train stop here, train stop there, or walking thousand miles here. And be strategic, and I felt a sense of accomplishment when I would go and visit all those places. And then the other thing that I did, and I learned this years ago, is that a win was if you could walk away from that office with at least one piece of information. Maybe it was the name of the receptionist. Maybe it was what kind of solution they had already in place. Maybe it was who the decision maker was. Even better, maybe the card or the email or phone number of the decision maker. If you could just get one thing, to me, it was a successful cold call sale on the face-to-face. And the same thing on the phone, right? Same thing. If I could get one piece of information from that phone call, right? To me, it was a win. And it gave me encouragement when I got that win. Obviously, a cold call it happened to me once in my entire career, where I literally showed up and I was able to sell that on the spot, right there on the spot. Never's happened. Usually 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 meetings, right? But yeah, so it's just kind of progressing. It's kind of, you're not looking for a yes. Really, you're not looking for a yes. You're trying to collect information. You're trying to see if there may be some challenges and see if there's ways that you can help them. And so, I minimize in my brain the rejection piece, because they're not rejecting me for anything. I'm just inquiring, learning, getting some information.
Great. So one thing that I've certainly noticed is that there's sometimes a bit of a disconnect from communications between sales and marketing, right? Obviously, sales would prefer not to do cold calls, right? Sales would like marketing to actually hand them the Glengarry leads, right? And just sort of have the really warm ones where the conversations are going to be start off much more positive and they're pre-qualified, et cetera. But I think marketing also feels like sometimes they don't get the information they need from sales, is to sort of like, okay, when you're having all these conversations, which are the better prospects? Like, what do they have in common? Because if marketing doesn't know what the good prospects look like and what the good sales look like, then they can't really focus their efforts, right? So breaking down the silos between sales and marketing, I think is something that a lot of companies need to do more. Have you had any sort of tips and tricks? Because you've probably been in situations where you have a marketing team who's supposed to be there to help you, right? But at the same time, maybe the communication level wasn't where it needed to be.
Yeah, I mean, I've had with the organization I'm affiliated now with, Quadient, I've had some high level marketing executives, VPs, come with me out in the field. And I feel that's a really good way for them to really understand sort of what we're dealing with, what we're looking at, right? I think also a lot of, actual conversations, real conversations with sales and marketing, because you're right. And I was in the marketing world for years before I shifted over into the biz dev world. But, there was this sort of, this ivory tower kind of a feel where you're up there and you just sort of like, yeah. And if you could get in the trenches and really speak to and experience what the sales team is really feeling and going through, I think you could be much more effective. Also, because I've got a little bit of a crazy brain. I think I mentioned it earlier in this podcast that I'm learning disabled dyslexic, right? My brain has this sort of creative kind of mind, that problem solving mind. So I've created some approaches, whether it be some phone calls, conversation dialogues, or emails, and I forwarded it onto marketing sometimes, and it would be helpful to know if they're using it, they like it. But I've done that, and I know it works for me. Not everything works, but I've found things that work. And I think if marketing would make sure that they're communicating with the successful, biz dev professionals, then they could be way more effective at what they do.
Great, great. Well, this has been a great conversation about the networking in particular, but also biz dev, sales, and marketing. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat and do the brainstorming.
It's awesome. It's been a pleasure, Kevin. I really appreciate getting a chat with you and getting some exposure to your viewership. Appreciate that.
Great. Thanks so much.